Okay, I think we're live here, and welcome to this week's Rural Rapport. I'm Sandra Renner, Farm and Community Director here at the Center, and I'm here today with our Community Development Manager, Jordan Feyerherm, and we'll get started here in just a minute or so, but as you're coming in, let us know when you're here by saying hello in the chat box, and please ask questions at any time in the chat box. We'll be watching the questions as we go, and we'll try to work those in. And we will also be sharing resources as we talk about them, so you can see them up close and save them to read later or share with others. So, well, I think I will just go ahead and get started here and just introduce you a little bit to the Center for Rural Affairs. Since 1973, we've been a leading force, engaging people to build a better rural future. As long as rural advocates are needed for healthcare, clean energy, sustainable agriculture, food systems, and community development, we'll be on the front lines. The center does this through federal and state policy advocacy in Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, and Minnesota. We do small business development and training, business and home mortgage lending in Nebraska, and community development and capacity in Nebraska as well by building capacity building through hands-on training, technical assistance, and leadership development in the areas of farm, food, and environment, Native communities, and community development around rural community inclusion. So again, welcome. My name is Sandra Renner, Farm and Community Director at the Center, and I'm joined here today by Jordan Feyerherm, who is our Community Development Manager and whose team focuses on the community capacity piece, the leadership development, and rural welcoming and inclusion efforts. Good morning, Jordan, or afternoon actually now.
Yeah, good morning. Glad to be here.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the work you oversee. What does community development around rural community inclusion look like?
Definitely, that's a great question and one that we get a lot actually. Community inclusion, community development, they can all mean a lot of different things. I think the way that we approach community development and inclusion is working with community leaders, lay leaders, and just folks in the community to give them tools, resources, and experience to really engage with difference across cultures, across different backgrounds, just kind of looking at ways to leverage all the differences that each and every one of us brings to our community in a way that kind of helps everyone get along and improve the towns that they live in.
So why are we talking about cultural competency today? We're talking about a foundation to change, which from a cultural competency perspective. So what does that mean? And why is it important to rural leaders?
Definitely. Cultural competency, along with all my other words, are one of those that takes a little time to kind of define what it means to us. Cultural competency at the center and the way that we work with it and the way that it engages and dovetails with community inclusion and a foundation to change, our new workshop that we've been putting on, is learning how to engage with different cultures. And I'm going to backstep here. When we talk about cultures, it can mean someone from the United States and someone from Japan as being two cultures. But two cultures can also be someone that works in HR and someone that works in sales. Anytime that people get together, they form their own kind of shorthand for dialogue, their own expectations, and their own kind of understanding, their own culture within a group of people. So intercultural competency or cultural competency, or having the skill of cultural competence, however you want to define it, is all about learning how to authentically and respectfully engage across differences. And that's not saying that you're going to be an expert in every culture in the world, but it is going to say that the more you practice this skill, and it is a skill, just like learning to cook or playing basketball, is something that you have to practice to improve. And with practice, you're going to be finding yourself more dynamic and more comfortable with engaging with different cultures and be able to learn how to improve the conversations that come through those, learning how to more authentically engage with other people and come to more mutual beneficial outcomes. So jumping to a foundation to change. A foundation to change is our new workshop, like I mentioned, that it focuses on how can we practice our intercultural competence in a group setting. So putting those differences on the table and learning to how to, instead of how can we ignore the differences, how can we focus on the differences and move forward with them?
Great. Yeah, that's a lot to unpack, Jordan, and thanks for doing that for us. You know, when you talked about just the different little subcultures, you know, between HR and sales, they definitely speak different languages. So we're talking about culture and language figuratively and literally at times. When I'm thinking about, you know, what this all means to rural America and rural Nebraska specifically, where we're focusing some of this work, I think there is a tendency to think that Nebraska is pretty homogenous, but we've experienced a lot of demographic shifts in the last couple of decades, and there's now over 87 languages and multiple cultures related to all of those languages across the state at this time. So why is cultural competence important to leaders in rural communities? And how can they use that to leverage bringing people together?
Definitely. So cultural competence is hugely important no matter the setting. Like I mentioned about how cultures can be formed with even very similar individuals in a homogenous community between HR and sales. You also mentioned that the demographics in rural America is changing considerably as well. So the reason intercultural competency is so important is because our world, especially as we've noticed over the pandemic, where everything has gone virtual, our world has gotten quite a bit smaller. We're engaging with people from all over the world, all different backgrounds and all different expectations. So learning how to authentically engage with people who may not share your same shorthand is vital to getting your own point across, understanding their own point, and learning how to bring our perspectives together so we can move forward. In Nebraska, for example, we have seen demographics change all over our communities, and some of the strongest communities in terms of population growth and economic stability are some of those that have seen the biggest demographic changes in the recent decades. And that's just one example of why it's so important to be able to authentically engage with others across cultural differences. And another thing I like to point out in all of this is, oh, there goes my thought. Excuse me, Sandra, could you throw that question back to me?
Oh, sure. Well, we can move into like what specifically is a foundation to change, and maybe it'll come back to you because we're talking about who might be an ideal participant and what they're learning in a foundation to change and how they can use that to leverage their cultural competency.
Definitely. And I actually just got my thought back. When we're talking about homogenous cultural groups, especially in small rural towns in Nebraska, it's one of those things that, and people, I'm sure you've heard if you're familiar with rural Nebraska or rural America in general, that people will tend to generalize. They assume that we're very homogenous, that we kind of are a monolith of a culture in this part of America. But even if the people in a community are what you would call culturally homogenous, all it takes is kind of scratching below the surface to see how culturally different we all are, whether that be our ancestors coming from different parts of Europe in some situations or different parts of the world. We all have things that make us unique and different to the people in our communities. And especially in a homogenous community, those little differences can be the big differences. So we all have these touchstones. And that is an important kind of building block to entering into our workshop of Foundation to Change, is understanding that you don't need to be or engaging with someone from a different part of the world or someone that's coming from a very different background of you to practice your intercultural competence. It's about learning to identify the differences that we all share instead of shying away from them. So the ideal participant for a Foundation to Change is anyone who wants to practice this skill. We have found that it can be very successful and can bring a lot of value to local government, for example, education institutions, universities. It can work great for even businesses. Anytime where you have especially bigger organizations where we have lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds, this can just be a good practice for coming together and learning how to better speak with each other. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the big focus of this, is how can we speak more effectively with one another so we can actually hear what the other person is saying and understand what their intent is. So the ideal participant is someone that is looking to engage with the subject matter and practice their intercultural competence.
Thanks. So glad you got your thought back on that, because I think you just, scratching below the surface in what's seemingly homogenous. I think in recent history, we all can relate to issues and differences that were a much wider gap in previous decades, such as differences in religious backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds. And, whether you're from Eastern Europe or Western Europe, that was definitely some of those triggers. And so there are communities that there are still undertones of that in, and it's good to remember just these different shifts and how they happen and how we've responded to them in the past. So,
or even different political affiliations within our own families. I mean, all of these things are representative of kind of differences of who we are.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a familiar one that's come up a lot recently. So how do participants take what they learn in this workshop series and apply it to their work or community? Have you heard any feedback from folks that have participated, or do we give them an opportunity to practice that?
Definitely. So the whole setup of a foundation to change, I'll give a little premise to this. A foundation to change usually works best with a larger group of people, so 12 or more. We've done them close to 30 people before, and that's always great, though we can modify to do smaller groups as well. And because this came out of the pandemic, it is all set up to be virtual. So we're in Zoom, but we also have the option to engage with each other in kind of a virtual classroom, if you want to think about that. We have a shared whiteboard that we can all put our notes on. And so throughout the entire workshop, we're breaking off into small groups consistently throughout it, so we can practice our different conversation techniques and learning to hear each other and practicing putting our differences on the table. So we will all come together in a larger group. We'll explain the concepts that we're going to be working through, break off into small groups to explore some of those, come back, debrief, and rinse and repeat with a lot of different activities. As far as feedback, I've heard a lot of great things from folks that have really found value in this, and not just, so we found a lot of success with an organization going through it, because going back to talking about language and how it doesn't have to be a literal language, and I've provided a lot of definitions for a lot of the things that we've talked about so far. And that's a good piece for if an organization is to engage with the foundation to change, is going to build a shared language of understanding. What do we mean when we say diversity, equity, inclusion? What do we mean when we say, this intercultural competence? What do we mean by this initiative? Every person's understanding of a term is going to be slightly different. So by going through an activity like this and talking about these words and what they mean to us as members of this organization, as members of this cultural group, you could even say, we kind of have that shared language, and we're practicing this shared language with one another, which is huge. But if you're an individual that wants to join in one of these foundation to change, maybe you don't know anyone in the workshop, you're still going to get a lot of value out of it, because you're going to be practicing, being a little bit vulnerable with strangers. You're going to practice sharing a little bit about yourself. And what happens is the person you're speaking to, they're going to share a little bit about themselves too. It's a kind of a practice and reciprocity of of putting our differences on the table. So someone that is joining as an individual, they're going to gain skills on how they can, meet new friends in their own community, someone that they in other situations wouldn't have talked to. Maybe they'll feel a little more curious about going to the grocery store that they haven't been to in town, and things like that.
Great. Well, I think one of the things too that you touched on earlier in the workshop that I'm aware of, and I think is especially helpful to individuals who might be part of the dominant culture, is just reflecting on your own various identities and how you relate to them, and how that how you present yourself to the world and how you think about things is through those identities, and different aspects of identities that you may be especially proud of or are painful, and just just touching on that a little bit in reflecting on what identity really is to all of us. I think that's a really worthwhile conversation that you touch on really early in the workshop.
Definitely. Intersectionality is a big piece of foundation to change. And that means exactly what you were just saying, that even if we are, the son of a Colombian immigrant like me, that's only one piece of my identity. I also grew up in Lincoln. I am someone that likes to ride my bike. I mean, it's kind of silly, but all these different pieces of who you are, they form your identity. So you're not just one thing, you're a conglomeration of many different identities. And each one of those is going to be slightly different based on the combination. So, I mean, it may sound silly to say that no two people are alike, but I think that's especially important to really dive into, that when we're talking about who we are, who our identity is, it's a bunch of different things. Like, think of a big long math problem. It's this plus this plus this plus this, and that equal is never going to be the same as someone else's, because we're all coming together from these different aspects. Even if we share a lot of identities, we're not going to share all of them.
Indeed, we are all indeed multifaceted beings, and we're not going to share some as outwardly as others. But I think too, it's interesting to just learn what unconsciously you might not be always thinking about as part of your identity. Thanks so much for sharing a little bit more about that. So what would you say we have learned in the past few years? And I'm talking about the 2019 historic floods, the political divides and polarization in the last several years, and then, of course, the 2020, now turning, hopefully rounding out, 2021 pandemic. What would you say we've learned in the past few years with regard to what rural communities might need right now, and what we're hearing from community leaders that we're engaging with?
Definitely. So obviously a big question, but I would say the through line that kind of bridges all these events is that there was some type of crisis, some type of situation that needed a response to. And we can all agree that a response is most effective when it is agreed upon and it's by everyone and it's approached uniformly, that we need to all have the commitment to the response. That is very difficult when there are kind of communities within communities that aren't speaking to each other. So what we found, and we've learned through all these activities that we've done throughout the years, that in order to respond to the floods and to make sure, for example, in order to respond to the flooding, we can't just be speaking to one portion of a community. We have to be speaking to the whole community. Otherwise, some people are going to be left out. That's true of the pandemic. That's true of hearing people's political opinions. And going back to the idea that these are all homogenous communities, there's lots of different political opinions that can be glossed over. So by being able to have a direct line of communication to the community, having people feel that they have the safety to share their opinions on an open forum, that is absolutely vital. And going back to the floods, if you don't know who to speak to, if you don't know, or if we're assuming that the community is homogenous, you're only going to be focusing on the people that you think are in that homogenous group. So if there's folks that don't speak English, for example, and all of the flood resources are being distributed in the English language, there's going to be some people left out. Or if you're only putting out information in one aspect or in one avenue, the people who don't read the public news from that site, they're going to get left out. And that's actually led to another one of our topics. So after all this learning, we saw that throughout the pandemic, so at the Center for Rural Affairs, we saw that there wasn't, everyone wasn't getting information about public health in regards to the pandemic in general, how to stay safe. Do we wear masks? Do we wear 2 masks? What's the whole mask situation? That wasn't being communicated effectively to people of different cultural backgrounds and different language abilities. So we actually created a little news station from YouTube specific to a couple different communities across Nebraska in order to put that information out there. So kind of making sure that everyone has the same information so we can all make informed decisions from the same starting point.
Great. Yeah, and I guess from that experience, I think there probably were some key learnings of what people were getting, what information people were getting during the pandemic might have been information they may not have always gotten prior to the pandemic, in terms of how to navigate the community and where to go, with this added layer of how to also stay safe. So great. So if you're a community leader, or you're an emerging leader, or just someone who cares about being a bridge and knows there's so much more potential in your community, and you want to start a conversation, or maybe start a cohort, or get a group of people together for a foundation to change, what are some of your tips for starting that conversation and getting started?
I would say the best thing, especially if you want to join a foundation to change as a group, or even if you just want to engage in intercultural competency learning in general, and everyone has different learning styles. My personal suggestion, though, is to find a group of people that you can talk with. It doesn't have to be a group of people that all have the same opinion as you. That is actually honestly best if you can have a group of people that do have diverse opinions on things. It can be challenging, but you're also going to challenge yourself. And this type of learning, you need to be able to challenge yourself, and you need to be honest with yourself. So having people that you can have honest conversations with that are going to challenge and press you just makes the learning more effective. But before engaging with a foundation to change or any of this type of learning opportunities, it can really add to the effectiveness if you can have a group of people that can come together regularly, that you can talk with, that you can maybe do some different activities with, be it over Zoom or in person as we're all getting vaccinated. So just that's a great kind of first step in engaging with this, having people that you can bounce ideas back and forth, help you kind of understand things. And everyone's an expert in something, and you bring people together, we're all going to kind of expand our own minds that way. And then so once you have a group of people, it can be great as a next step to jump into a foundation to change, or some of our other different learning opportunities, or there's other opportunities out there as well. I'm partial to the ones that we offer, but I think that's a great way to start.
Thanks, Jordan. So tell folks how to connect with us to help them get started, or maybe some things to keep in mind, and how they might reach out to us for some support or to join a cohort. Our colleague Teresa is graciously adding some of the resources into the chat below. So we'll have some links to some of the things that Jordan's gonna potentially share with us.
Definitely. So please check out those links, but also check out our website, cfra.org. If you have any questions about things that we've talked about, feel free to reach out to me directly. My email address, and I'm sure that'll be shared as well. If not, I'm also on the website, but it is Jordan, JORDANF @cfra.org. Please feel free to reach out to me, send me an email, and we can talk about any questions that you may have and how we can bring some of these training opportunities to your community or organization.
Great. And we do have one new spot on our website where communities can come and request a training. So we just are launching a new entrepreneur and community coaching network. So communities that do feel like they are in a spot where they could benefit for some coaching or some advice on how to get started, you can hop on that link below and request some support and coaching as a community to kind of take you along in this journey. There is a sheet about our inclusion work and what we offer, just an info sheet you can download as well. And some considerations for, rural leaders, and a really nice piece that Jordan recently wrote about what communities need to have effective leaders, and that communities do need those effective leaders and why. As well as how differences make us stronger, and interacting with those differences. One organization that we really like, and it's very approachable, they have a lot of resources and toolkits, is Welcoming America. A couple of their resources that we really like are the Taste of Belonging Cookbook, a Promising Practices webinar on integrating immigrants in civic life, and another toolkit on building a welcoming economy for local economic development, how they can support immigrant business owners, investors, and entrepreneurs. A lot of great resources. Would there be anything else you'd like to share about Welcoming America, Jordan?
So Welcoming America is a great organization, and you can actually push to have your town labeled as a welcoming community, I think is the language that they use, which is kind of a great little designator just to kind of show that, your community is committed to being a welcoming space for everyone. One thing that you just mentioned that I really love is the Taste of America. Is that what you called it?
The Taste of Belonging Cookbook.
Taste of Belonging Cookbook. I feel that there's so much you can learn about different cultures and just people in general and their own traditions through food. I actually have a background in cooking, so that's something that's near and dear to my heart. But if you ever want to kind of know more about a country, a culture, or even just an individual or a family, look at what they're eating, because I'll tell you a whole lot about them.
That's a really great tip too, just for starting some of those conversations and encouraging intercultural perspectives, is getting folks together at a meal and sharing different foods and meals from their culture. It's one really great way to start engaging and asking questions in an environment that people really feel curious and comfortable asking those questions, and you can build from that right there. So glad you mentioned that one too, and it can be a starting point for a lot of great conversations. Tripping up on my words there. Anything else you'd like to add in closing, Jordan?
No, I just want to say thank you all for attending and watching this video at a later time. I think if you are curious about kind of starting either individually or with part of your organization on this intercultural competency journey, I think a great first step is just to kind of practice some self-reflection. Think about what does culture mean to you? What cultural group do I belong to? What are some aspects of my own identity? Just kind of start asking questions to yourself is a great way to start. And be honest with yourself and practice some self-reflection. That's always a great first step. And for all the following steps, we are here for you to provide support.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. Yeah, our email and contact information should be in the chat below. Don't hesitate to reach out to us or visit our website or any of the resources that we talked about here today. And Jordan, I want to thank you for joining me in this conversation, and for all of you watching now or at a later time. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Rural Rapport.
Thank you, Sandra.